Hello, and welcome back to another episode of International Immersion, a podcast that seeks to capture the combined experiences of people, places, culture, traveling, current events, living abroad, and much, much more. For today's episode, I would like to talk about an interesting topic in that it heavily has affected me, but also I think is not as heavily covered as its opposite number, which is culture shock. So today, I want to go in and give a personal example of reverse culture shock, in that if you spend time in another country for a whole host of reasons, when you come back to your home country, you never really are the same. At least that's my own experience of it. So without further ado, I would like to talk about the effects of reverse culture shock through my own example after living abroad in China for 4 years and coming back to the U.S. to enter the job market. So to begin with, I lived in China for 4 years. I did a master's degree, I studied a year of Chinese, and I worked for a period of time before I came back and took a job in the United States, in my hometown actually. But in the midst of that, towards the end of my time in China coming back, that's the first step, I think, that this hits you, is the first idea and thought of, oh, I'm going back home. And it's different than when perhaps you come back to visit, to see family or friends, and then you go back. But when you have that thought, I'm going back for good, or at least for the foreseeable future, it certainly starts a lot of thinking, and thoughts begin to bounce around in your head. Because I remember in the latter part of 2018, when I was finishing up and was applying for different jobs in the U.S., I knew my time there was diminishing, and it made me think of how my life had changed from being there and how my life would change after I would leave, coming back to the U.S. And at the end of 2018, I got a job and I came back right around Christmas, and I remember getting off the plane in the U.S. and thinking, wow, I'm back in the U.S. now, and I'm not going back to China like I have previously. And that was the first realization that came across. And at first it doesn't really hit you because you've just gotten back, you're jet lagged, and the short-term effects can vary for a lot of people, but for me it really wasn't a big deal because I came back, saw my family again, saw some of my friends, ate the food I used to like, and within a month I started my new job. But I would certainly say it's the long-term effects that really can manifest widely, and as mentioned, it can vary upon the individual, their makeup, psychology, so on and so forth. I would actually say for me, it gave me a much larger perspective of the world, having met so many people, learned so many different things, and being exposed to different thought processes, cultures, ways of doing things. All of that really had a big impact in the 3 years now that I've been back in the United States from coming back, or going on 4 now. But I just remember the biggest thing was how it affected my overall outlook. Because when I came back, my outlook and my way of thinking in some cases had heavily changed, and it differed from a lot of my peers back where I was from. And it really started to manifest the more time I spent with my family, friends, and people around, in that I didn't feel the same as I was before. I didn't feel a sense of like, oh, I'm back in my community. I felt I was back in a community that I knew, but my way of doing things and my thought processes and how I can relate to people really did change. And in many cases, it really, I think, degraded my relatability to a lot of people because no one around could really compare to my own experiences. While I have several friends who did similar things to me and I can relate to them and they to me, the vast majority of people around me couldn't, and in many cases when talking to them about my experiences, it was kind of like an enigma to them in a sense that they were very curious, but also at the same time they either couldn't understand, they were a bit shocked, or they would always ask, oh, how'd you live outside in another country for 4 years, or weren't you scared? A whole host of reactions that related to these, and I would answer them, but that's one thing I really noticed. Oh, interesting, this is far different than before. And I would say another effect of reverse culture shock was, in a sense, isolation, because my friendships that I had before and during, they really kind of petered out in the first year and a half to 2 years I was back, in that most of my high school friends and people that I had known beforehand, I'm really no longer in association or contact with a few exceptions. And that could be for a whole host of reasons, but in many cases I think the change and relatability and outlook on life, so on and so forth, and who knows, maybe many other things that I'm not really touching upon, I think all of those things had a big effect and were influencing factors. But in many cases it was kind of sad, because I know many of these people from high school, 10 years or less, or in some cases longer. So that was one negative aspect that I don't attribute directly to my experiences, but just as a byproduct of, I think, a whole host of things: life, experiences, relatability, many others that I've mentioned or have not mentioned. But in many cases it was kind of sorrowing, because I just felt that it was harder to connect with people on the same things, because while they're just, universal values and things people do, just in terms of interest, hobbies, and methods of conversation, those things took a while to kind of bounce back. And it really wasn't until, I would say, into 2020, well after a full year, that I really started to build up a new friend circle and, get back out more into the social life to a bigger extent. And that was a good thing, but the issue never really has gone away. And I'd say another big impact is that since then I've been drawn to other people from different countries. Americans I still contact with normally. It's not a huge thing, but I'm definitely more interested and attuned to talking with people from different countries and not just, the people around me. And I think that's because when you're living abroad, you really meet a lot of people and you kind of build up a familiarity with people from different countries, because you're studying together, you're living in a different country together, so there's a sense of like, hey, we're both expats, or we're both doing the same thing, we're studying abroad, and there's kind of a relatability and a bond that can form, and you can build some great friendships, as I did that way. But when you come back, it kind of touches on both these topics of both outlook and, in a sense, isolation, because of the reduction in relatability. At least that's my own personal experience. I think everyone can have a different perspective and different experiences, but that's one thing that I really noticed, was the relatability really dropped, and that took some time to recover. And then, as I mentioned, the loss of friends was another thing. Basically you could say you lost some friends and over time you gain new ones, and I think that's part of life. But at the same time, friendship to me is a very sacred thing, and people that I am friends with, I feel a sense of loyalty and a sense of wanting to maintain those friendships and develop them. And when that's not reciprocated or fades away, it can be quite sombering, because if you put a lot of effort and time into building friendships and maintaining them, when there's not the same reciprocity, it can create a whole host of emotions. But for me, generally a little more negative. And I think the other thing that I really want to stress is that just my point of view on so many things has been changed, altered, modified, how many other classifiers you can describe. But that's one thing that I've learned, that there's really no right way to do something. There are many ways to do something. There are so many methods, ideologies, perspectives, all of that you can gain a greater sense by leaving your comfort zone and leaving where you're from, and gaining insight into other places and how people in those places go about every aspect of life and their point of view, methodology, etc. So reverse culture shock is a very wild thing, because it can manifest in such different ways. But for me, it certainly had a cost and many benefits at the same time, because it certainly helps me in my current profession, having my international experiences and language ability and other things. But I definitely feel much less of a connection to where I'm from after this experience. And home is home, but it doesn't have the same element that it did before. And I attribute that to living in different places and having expanded point of view and ideas on things. So I find that for me, it's made me less grounded to one place, and it's made me more adaptable, but at the same time, at the cost of, I'd say, a sense of community. But as mentioned, that has improved over time. But I think this is one thing a lot of people go through and may not talk about it, or talk about it to greater or less extents. But I just wanted to share that today because it's something that I've experienced and thought about off and on for several years now, and I wanted to express it. And I'm curious to anyone who's listening, what have been your experiences if you've lived abroad or you've done things and you've come back after a period of time? How did it make you feel? What happened over time? What were the short and long-term effects? And, how did it affect your relationships, family, friends, etc.? So it's an interesting thing, and I would never trade my experiences for anything. They were wonderful, and I appreciated every second that I had and the opportunity to do what I do, because very few people get the opportunities to live in a different place, absorb so many things, and take it back and add that to your life and to your professional competency and abilities. So with that, I just wanted to share with this today about reverse culture shock and just the many, many effects that it can have through my own personal example. And I'm really eager to hear about other people, as mentioned, and curious to see what your experiences might have been. And for people who are listening to this, I think if you meet people who have traveled, or they're coming back after a period of time, or short, long, intermediate, whatever it may be, I think just know that they're not going to be exactly the same. Their personality has not changed, but their way of thinking and all the elements I described have changed to certain degrees. I know for me it was, I'd say, more of a moderate change to a heavy change in some things. But just try to show a curiosity in them, ask about their experiences, and I think it'll be very rewarding because you can gain a lot, and at the same time you'll give that person a sense of, I'm interested, what did you do? And it'll give them a better sense of, oh, I'm back and people are interested and curious about what I've done. Because if you don't get that, it definitely can, as I mentioned, have an isolation or an isolating effect. So with that, that's been the episode today. I just wanted to do the short one to go over this, but I think it's a very important topic and something that should be talked about more, because you always hear about culture shock, what it's like to be in a new place, and trust me, everyone had that, including me. But for me, I would say that the reverse culture shock was actually much harder and more impactful than the culture shock, because depending on you as a person, your ability to adapt can be very, very vast, or it can be rather limited, and I find most people are somewhere in the middle. So with that, this has been another episode of International Immersion. We'd love to hear what you have to say. Shoot us an email at internationalimmersionpodcast@gmail.com. Check out our Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn page, International Immersion. We're curious to hear what you have to say. We love to talk about different topics. We're trying to expand and cover new things, given the tremendous changes that are going on in the world now. But also, we don't want to lose that human connection, to talk about personal experiences and just what the benefits are of just getting out there and exploring, meeting people, and learning, because that is really the bread and butter of, I think, solving and addressing so many issues and building a better sense of a global community, not just a local community, which we all are part of in one way or another. So with that, this has been another episode. Stay safe, take care, and we will see you on the next one.